Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadline so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Hey all you heroes, hawks, heralds, crows, pirates, and wardens. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and galaxy brain about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe. From character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods, we will cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. I'm one of your hosts, Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm your other host, Shelby, or Shecup.
And we are coming to you to talk about a character deep dive. And so we are going on a character deep dive to a fan favorite, I would say. I don't see a lot of people who don't like this character, at least online. The only thing I see is maybe criticizing her design or maybe her portrayal in some things, but I don't see a lot of people like, oh, we hate this character.
I think that's really an interesting take because I feel like this character... Actually, let me just preface this by saying I like this character. But I do feel like she is forgettable. I feel like she is a mid character. I don't believe that her story, as it is portrayed in Dragon Age 2, has a real lasting effect on the world of Thedas. Yes, she does things that affect Thedas, but she is not remembered herself. So I do feel like she's a bit forgettable. I have a lot of critiques with the way that this character is written, and we'll get into that in the episode. But for today, we're talking about Isabela, as you may have guessed from the title of this episode. But I do think that Isabela is, I mean, she's definitely got her fans, right? Like, there's definitely people out there who love her. There's definitely people out there who hate her, as every character has. But I don't necessarily feel like she has a rabid fan base, nor does she have rabid haters.
I would agree with that, in that she doesn't have rabid haters. I think it's more of, I think the reason Isabela is forgettable is that she does not have an Act 3 storyline.
Yeah, that's
point. Really why. Her story finishes in Act 2 of DA2.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I mean, all of the other materials that she's been in, all of the other comics, her story is basically dictated by other people. She's not quite powerless, but the action happens to her rather than her being a person with agency.
Mm-hmm. A passive character.
Very much a passive character. So let's just get into the fun facts, and then we'll probably have some more analysis of this sort at the end of the episode. So first fun fact is that Isabela is one of just a very few number of characters who appear in Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, and Dragon Age Inquisition.
Where does she appear in Inquisition?
She is in the multiplayer.
Oh, that would explain why. I have no idea what you're talking about.
That is correct. So my next fun fact, I put this in the fun facts, even though I don't particularly consider it fun. It just is. Anyway, so Cheryl Chi wrote Isabela in Dragon Age 2, whereas David Gator wrote her in the comics. And I do feel like that shows. Okay. So something I do think we need to talk about before we get too far into this episode is Isabella's appearance. Now, there were numerous people who did not recognize her from Origins when they were playing 2. And I think that's actually totally understandable. Number one, they do look pretty different. But according to David Gator on Tumblr, Isabela always had dark skin. In Origins, she is dark-skinned and has one of the darkest skin tones in that game, but the lighting makes her look paler than she already is. This can be checked by putting her model into the DA toolset and seeing it without the pearls lighting. Secondly, they do have different voice actors between games, but since the VA for Anora also voiced Isabela in Origins, they got a different Isabela voice actor in Dragon Age 2. And additionally, there is some promo art of her with paler skin, and David Gator also said that this was a marketing error. She was always meant to be more dark skinned. So the difference between her skin tones, she should always be on the darker range of it. And I do think the one thing that is funny about the situation is that it is addressed in game, because when and if Isabela meets King Alistair in the Viscount's Keep in 2, Alistair will say that she looks different, to which Isabela will respond, "Don't we all?"
Yeah. And to address this, like, it makes sense for Isabela to have dark skin. Like, I think it makes sense for where she is from and the like lifestyle that she chooses. She is outside most of the time. Even if she's not, but even if she were of a like Caucasian white complexion, she would still have a darker complexion for that group just because she's out in the sun a lot more.
Right. And I mean, most of the like coastal communities, the Caribbean especially, which I think Ravane takes a lot of inspiration from, there are darker skin tones in those areas. The closer you get to the equator, the darker your skin tones are. And I don't know if Thetis has an equator. I would love to know the answer to that question, but regardless,
where's our globe, BioWare?
Yeah, come on, no. that would mean they would have to give us the rest of the map, which they have not. So
exactly.
But something else that I did want to say is that of all the characters that we've seen, most Ravanes do have darker skin tones. Duncan, Vivian, Isabela, they all have darker skin tones. And I think that that's something that we should really keep in mind when we talk about the differences in Isabela's appearance between Origins and 2. So my last little fun fact for tonight is, according to the World of Thetis Encyclopedia, official reports from various countries report that Isabela spent a total of 7 months and 21 days in numerous jails in numerous port cities throughout Thetis over the course of 10 years.
That doesn't surprise me. I think this is a good like place to talk about this in the fun facts. Do you think, I mean, I know like she does, but how much influence do you think Jack Sparrow has on the character of Isabela?
I would say a lot. I'm honestly surprised there's not a jar of dirt line in Dragon Age 2. They have I like big boats and I cannot lie, but no jar of dirt. I mean, come on.
Well, hold on. No, yeah. I don't know my Pirates of the Caribbean timeline if Jar of Dirt had been out.
I have no idea.
When Dragon Age 2, because isn't it like...
I have no idea. So don't even ask.
Yeah.
Anyway, not important at all. So are we ready to get into her general backstory?
I am.
All right. So first off, we know a lot about Isabela and her early years. So she was born in Ravane as Naish. Her mother was a woman named Madame Hari, who styled herself as a Ravani seer, but was not one of them. Instead, she was a thief and a charlatan. She never knew her father, as he was a one-night stand with Madame Hari, and they would often take trips to other Ravani villages and towns, mostly because Madame Hari claimed that she just needed to like go and commune with the spirits, but in reality, they were going to steal from people and or hawk her fake talismans and charms. Isabela went on these trips with her mother, and they often lasted weeks. And so from a very young age, we know that she was exposed to this kind of dishonesty, this kind of lying, this ideology of if a person is stupid enough to get stolen from, then they deserve their fate. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of ideology and the kind of setting that Isabela is raised in.
And like it's so interesting because everyone always compares like Ravane to Spain because, you know, Antigua is Italy and they're near each other and there's always like similar things beyond that. But like every time I hear about Ravane and like the witchy kind of culture that exists in Ravane, it reminds me, like you said, so much of Caribbean, and not even that, but like southern, very, very southern coastal Louisiana.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I do definitely think that they're leaning more into the Caribbean vibes, especially now that they have created the Lords of Fortune. I definitely think they're leaning into the pirates, Black Flag kind of comparisons.
Yeah, I definitely think they're leaning into that pirates theme. And I remember with the concept art that they say and thinking to myself, like, wow, that looks like Black Flag. Like that looks like a location I would go to in Assassin's Creed Black Flag.
Yes, very much agree with that. So my next point about Isabela is, again, about her mother. And when she was a teenager, when Isabela was a teenager, her mother, Hari, converted to the Qun. And she wanted Isabela to convert with her, but Isabela refused, as you may remember from our episode on the early comics. So Hari's solution was, I'm just going to force this teenager into a marriage so that I can be rid of her and I can fuck off to the Qunari. So Isabela hates this. And she is forced into this arranged marriage with a man named Luis, who is a wealthy merchant and a associate of the Antivan Crows. And we're not really given his age, but this is depicted in the comics, and it's clear that this man is very significantly older than Isabela. And I wanted to read from the World of Thetis Encyclopedia Volume 2, because the way that it's written, the way that this story is written there, I think just explains the point perfectly. So here's what the World of Thetis says. Mother and daughter fought long and bitterly over Hari's decision, and Hari simply stopped trying to persuade her daughter. Isabela thought she won, that she had finally convinced her mother to stop allowing the Qunari to train her into accepting slavery. She was wrong. Not 2 days later, a man came to the door of their little shack with a small entourage. He wore brocade and perfumed silk. His nails were clean and smooth. Just take her, Hari told the man, without looking at her daughter. The man, who was called Luis, was to be Isabela's new husband. It was the last time the mother and daughter would ever see each other.
So, Madame Hari joins the ever-growing list of terrible parents in Thetis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Madame Hari and Hallward Pavis just need to be kicked to the metaphorical curb. And they deserve to be tortured in Thetis' version of hell for the rest of eternity.
Well, Howard might be.
Why?
Because he's dead?
Well, I mean, fair, but we don't even know if hell exists in Thetis.
I guess that's true. I mean, I would argue that every time we've been to the Fade,
that's fair. That's very fair. I want to skip forward a little bit in time. We'll come back to this setting when she gets married to Luis. But I want to talk about a few things that Isabela said over the years about her marriage, and specifically about what her mother sold her to Luis for. I have a whole list, and they're pretty similar, but she says that her mother sold her for a handful of gold and a goat. She says that her mother sold her for a handful of gold and a cow. She says that her mother sold her for a handful of gold and a dozen chickens. She also says that her mother sold her for a basket of fade weasels, which I don't even know what that is. But at the end of the day, according to Varric, Isabela once and once only said that her mother gave her away in exchange for nothing more than the promise that her daughter would be looked after.
Okay, so I want to pause here because I have some thoughts. And just kind of vibing with this of let's do a thought of experiment and assume Hari had good intentions with Isabela. I know you're making that face at me right now, but I think like if we're going to look at the lore, let's assume this from this perspective. A lot of times these like piratey characters, the thing they only say once is the truth.
Yes. And I think this is the truth.
Right. And so it kind of paints Hari. I almost wonder if there's a behind the scene thing where the Qun has basically said either your daughter converts or we give her the drug that makes everyone docile. I can't remember. Quebec or something like that. And Hari doesn't want that for Isabela because she knows what it will do. And so in her way, she would give it for nothing because she just doesn't want her daughter to have to endure that, which would, in my mind, kind of imply like this idea of having good intentions but just being a terrible person.
I guess I would understand that more because I feel like Hari, if that was the case, she could have set Isabela up for success more. Like, why would she not just send Isabela with whatever gold she had left and go and live your life? Or go and let me send you to a friend of mine in whatever city we live nearest to. Why would she sell her to this creepy, disgusting old man?
I mean, that is a fair point. I think that's a fair criticism of that side. My only kind of response to that would be in the mindset, especially of someone who is a thief and a charlatan, she might not have friends. She might not have anyone to send Isabela to. And a lot of times people who are like thieves and charlatans and con people, they idolize the super wealthy. And so in this case, it would be the nobility. And so setting up Isabela with the nobility and that noble life is like the dream and goal. And so Hari would view that as the best she could do for Isabela.
Sure, but then also she had to have had contacts. Maybe not friends, but people she worked with in the city. She just had to have because she sold all of these fake Ravani artifacts. So I just feel like there are so many different ways that she could have gone about this. And I know that this was kind of a thought experiment to put ourselves in her shoes, but I personally feel like she didn't care that much about whatever happened to Isabela. Like, she didn't want her to die, but if she was unhappy, then so be it. Okay, so let's move on a little bit because so Madame Hari basically turns Isabela over to Luis and they get married 3 weeks later. She's 18, about to turn 19, and Luis had moved her to Antiva City where he basically like just demonstrates the depth of his wealth and luxury. And so he buys her fine clothing, hires a tutor to teach her how to read and write. He is basically attempting to train her how to be a noblewoman. This storyline reminds me a lot of Eliza Doolittle from Pygmalion, because it's basically the same story where she's a Cockney English woman who tries to get rid of her accent, meets a wealthy man who helps her with it, and she like learns the rules of etiquette and all this stuff along the way. Like, it's basically the same story. So I wouldn't be surprised if they took inspiration from that play. But back to Isabela. At the end of the day, this marriage that she has to Luis is always going to be loveless. He has always wanted her to be a plaything. and she didn't want to be that. And then she gets bored, and then he expects her to be this kind of woman of the house, this lady of the house, and act in a way that's befitting of that title. And she doesn't want to do any of those things. And so Isabela, in her very Isabela way, begins to deliberately antagonize him. And she does all of this in hopes of him letting her go. And that's when she starts an affair with none other than Zevran Ariani. Obviously, Isabela is sleeping with a lot of men, having a lot of affairs in order to provoke Luis. And Zevran is the one that she actually kind of gets close to. And so it's Zevran who teaches her the basics of combat. It's Zevran who teaches her how to use a blade and how to use it well. And so Luis at this time realizes that his wife is out of control, basically. And so he planned to get rid of her. According to his journal, he planned to, quote unquote, lend her to certain business acquaintances who had expressed a certain interest. A week later, he was assassinated by Zevran. Isabela provides differing accounts to the exact circumstances of his assassination to different people. However, if Isabela is romanced by Hawke, she claims that she did not have Luis killed, although she was very grateful for his death regardless. However, later she claims to Varric that she directly orders his assassination. But the Antivan Crows keep their records secret, and so the identity of the person who wanted Luis dead and ordered the contract for the assassination has never been revealed. Though it is unclear in Isabela's role in this, she did help Zevran in the assassination because she gave him the location of the key to Luis's room. So regardless of whether or not she ordered the contract, she participated in the assassination.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I don't think Zevran could just kill without an order. I mean, he could kill in self-defense, but I don't think he could do a hit on a noble person without a contract. But I also it would be interesting if Isabela would be able to front the gold for a contract without Louise noticing.
Great question. She could have been hiding it away for a long time, though.
It's true.
But I think you're right. I don't think Zevran would have the authority, especially somebody like Zevran, who is maybe a good assassin, but not necessarily somebody who's high up in his house. I don't think that he could just skate by killing somebody of this magnitude, of this status, without a contract. So there had to have been a contract of some kind. However, I do think that fact in and of itself lends to the theory that there may have been somebody else out there who wanted a hit on him.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, it is Antiva.
True. So, okay, what happens after Luis is assassinated? Well, Isabela leaves the house with nothing but 2 daggers and a bag full of jewelry that she used to bribe sailors into helping her commandeer Luis's brand new ship, the Siren's Call. They then sailed to Lamarin, which is in Ravane, where the sailors promptly abandoned her. She won a new crew and a captain via a bet with a man named Jackdaw. Isabela wanted to learn under an experienced captain because she recognized that she didn't have the knowledge to be a captain. There are rumors that she and the Jackdaw started a very passionate love affair, though he disappeared, never to be seen again a year after they met. She soon started marketing herself essentially as the Queen of the Eastern Seas, allying with the raiders of the Waking Sea. By the time she lands in Kirkwall and Dragon Age 2, she'd been a captain for about 10 years.
Yeah, so she's tutored by someone named Jackdaw, Captain Jack.
Right.
It is in there. Also, I believe Jackdaw is the name of Edward Kenway's ship.
I believe you're right, yeah.
I mean, Pirate Isabela is the best version of Isabela, in my opinion, but
I don't know if there's a best version of Isabela.
Are you saying that because of Isabela or because of her writing and how
I'm
she's
saying
portrayed?
that because of the writing, for sure. But unless you have anything to talk about with her backstory, I think now is a good time to go to the mid-break.
What is this? A new book? All this shit is weird. Oh, Varric, that is a terrible title. What are you even thinking?
That book you were reading this morning, Hessarian's Spear. I don't think he had a spear in the legends.
He does in this one. Read the description.
Andraste knelt before no man but her maker. But she hadn't counted on the Archon Hessarian. Can Hessarian penetrate the tight-knit defenses of the warrior prophetess? Will she be prepared to face the full blast of his power? Wait a minute. Isabela, this is a vulgar thing.
You want to borrow it?
No!
You sure? It has pictures.
Not listening, I'm not listening.
Varric, does Hawk ever autograph books?
Why? Doesn't your copy of The Tale of the Champion have a big hole in it?
Yes, but it could also have Hawk's signature on it.
I'm just laughing at our mid-break sound because Cassandra being a Hawk stan just makes me laugh every time. But anyway, welcome to the middle of the show where we take time to thank our patrons. So thank you to all of our patrons who support us. A special thank you to our newest patron, Dresden C. I hope I said that correctly. That's what I'm going with, who signed up. Thank you for signing up on Patreon. A special thank you to our first patrons, Genesis and Lisa M. We appreciate y'all's support there. Another great way to support us is to leave us ratings or reviews. If you can't support us financially, if you leave us 5 stars and some kind words, we will read it out on a future episode of the show. And so I have a review from Apple Podcasts, comes from Star-Eyed Girl, and it says, returning fan highly recommends. Although I've been a fan of Dragon Age for nearly 10 years now, I've been recently getting back into the series with the impending release of Veilguard. Shelby and Austin have been so helpful in getting me caught up on everything I've missed and or forgotten. Thank you so much for that review, and we greatly appreciate it. And then lastly, in the middle of the show, short mid-break this week, come join our Discord where we talk about all things Veilguard. Cups Podcast Need More Discord. Find a link in the episode description on our website or in the description of any episode of the podcast. And you can find that also on our website. You can find our merch. Get your t-shirts and merch in preparation for Veilguard now. And that's all I have for the middle of the show.
All right, let's get back into it.
The past years have been so busy. We have earned at least a few moments of rest. A calm night out sounds... Oh, bravo! Bravo! Was the woman in gold playing a king? Who was the man in feathers? Oh, it's all very simple. The first actor's mask is determined by... well, I will lend you the program guide. But tell me, did you enjoy the performance? That was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. Truly. That part with the glittery, and they actually set fire to... Yes, I truly enjoyed it. Then I call tonight a great success.
I've got some of it written down now.
Give it here. Her breasts strained against the leather jerkin like 2 wild stallions corralled against their will. She pounced, the smooth moves of a jungle cat, and locked her thighs around Donnick's waist. He...
What?
Nothing. What is that?
Shh.
Isabela just thought she'd celebrate your love affair with a written dedication.
It's friend fiction. I do it out of love.
I will never, ever be clean again.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
All right, so let's get into her involvement in the games. So starting obviously with Dragon Age Origins, this will be short, but you can find Isabela in Origins if you didn't know. You can find her at the Pearl in Denerim, where she defeats a group of men in a duel. Her ship is there to fill up on supplies. And if you bring Zevran along, he introduces her as the Queen of the Eastern Seas and the sharpest blade in Lamarin. She can also teach you the duelist specialization, which it occurred to me while I was writing our show notes. If she can teach you the duelist specialization and Zevran is the one who taught her how to fight, why couldn't Zevran just teach you the duelist specialization?
Because Zevran is the assassin specialization.
I mean, I'm aware, but what's to say he couldn't teach you too?
I guess that's true.
Anyway, you can also, which I think most people are familiar with, you can hook up with Isabela and the Pearl, and your romance companion can potentially be included as well. The options are Isabela and the Warden, Isabela the Warden Liliana, Isabela the Warden Zevran, Isabela female Warden Alistair, Isabela Warden Liliana Zevran.
Do you find it interesting that Morrigan isn't an option in this?
Morrigan isn't an option, and the dialogue is very interesting because Morrigan basically says something to the lines of, if you touch that filth, I will never touch you again.
Interesting. Considering like Morrigan is a witch of the wild. So like it's not like she's some like proper princess who sits in there and like, oh no, I don't touch dirt.
Right. It's not like she's unfamiliar with being unwashed.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think it's more of a misogynistic effect of Dragon Age Origins, for sure.
One of many.
One of many. So let's move on to Dragon Age 2, however, because this is where Isabela is a full companion in the game. And she plays a role in main quest lines. She's a very important companion to the story of Dragon Age 2. Though the story of Dragon Age 2 can play out without you ever meeting her. So you first encounter her in the Hanged Man, brawling with a guy named Lucky. Once she joins your party, she tells you that she was a smuggler who fell out of favor with her superiors because she freed 200 Blight refugees that they were transporting to sell into slavery. Isabela believes that finding a valuable relic that she's lost will settle her debt. We later learn that this relic she's looking for is the Sacred Tome of Khoslan, which is basically the Bible, and like not just the Bible, but like the first edition of the Bible for the Qunari. So it's a really important sacred item.
It's probably more into the Bible. It's probably more akin to a Torah scroll that will sit into the in a synagogue.
Okay, Austin.
I'm just saying. Than like a standard Bible. I know that like that is part of the Bible, but I'm just saying.
Okay. Thank you for the correction. Both comparisons I think are fair. I think more people are going to know what Bible is than Torah. Just saying.
Whatever.
Anyway. So in Act 2, the quest progresses when Isabela tells you that the relic you're searching for was actually stolen by Isabela from Orlesians who were just trying to return it to the Qunari. Which is why Isabela and the Qunari are shipwrecked in Kirkwall. After a few fights that you have with other people in looking for the tome, you eventually will find a letter from Isabela that says she's found the Tome of Khoslan and is leaving Kirkwall. With a high enough friendship or rivalry, she will return at the end of Act 2 to deliver the tome to the Qunari in order to prevent further attack on the city. You can fight the Arishok for her life and keep her in the game, and then you have to duel the Arishok, or you can turn her over to them, which means you don't have to duel the Arishok, and she's allegedly killed, and you will not be able to play as Isabela, have her in your party throughout the rest of the game. However, Varric will say that he has heard she escaped their grasp. Though technically that's just a rumor, I believe it. And so that's pretty much her involvement in Dragon Age 2. As you've said, she doesn't really have a main quest line in Act 3 because she can potentially die in Act 2. So do you have thoughts about her in Dragon Age 2? I know Dragon Age 2 is your favorite game, so just opening the floor.
My thoughts with like Isabela, and this really kind of goes into why I love her, but it kind of comes back to like her romance. So I like her. I think she's good comic relief. She's obviously a good rogue. I mean, we all know Varric is the best rogue of the companions in DA2 at least. But as far
different types of rogues,
yes. There are some critiques of Isabela in her appearance, but I think at least like for me with Isabela in her appearance in DA2 is I don't feel like her sexuality is the only defining feature of her character. There's a lot more things that she cares about, a lot more things that she tries to do than her own sexuality. She's just comfortable in it. And in a lot of ways, she uses it to her advantage in a lot of ways. Now, I will admit that like Isabela's like body and clothing make zero sense in practicality and are definitely a woman designed by a man.
Yeah, but I mean, I do agree with you in Dragon Age 2, in the game specifically, it feels different than it does in the comics. Like in Dragon Age 2, she doesn't feel objectified. She feels like a woman who's in charge of her own decisions. Whereas for me in the comics, she feels like a woman whose decisions are being made by everyone but her. And so I feel like that is a pretty big distinction. And I mean, she is a sexual person. She is definitely not one to be bound by like rules or anything like that, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I agree with you. I feel like her portrayal is pretty different in the comics than in 2. But speaking of, let's get into the comics. So the Silent Grove, Those Who Speak, and Until We Sleep, she appears in all 3. And she does have a significant role in them. This role is, unfortunately, primarily to be abused. And you can go listen to our episode on these 3 comics for greater detail into that. We're not going to rehash all of that information, but basically TLDR, we learn that in Isabela's younger years in the Raiders, she dealt in slave trading, and to escape Orlesians who hate slave traders, she dumped an entire crew of slaves overboard. And remember this, put that in your back pocket because we will bring this up again later. So in Inquisition, Varric says that Isabela is now known as an admiral of the Raiders of the Waking Sea, though he isn't sure if that's more of a self-stylization or an official title. And secondly, she does appear in Inquisition's multiplayer, serving as a field agent in both Ferelden and Orlais. And I do think that her appearance from 2 to Inquisition, like, she's very recognizable. You instantly know who she is. And I think she looks amazing in Inquisition.
Which is not said for everyone who moves to Inquisition. There are some people who have big glow-ups. Cullen, glow up.
Cassandra, glow up.
Right.
Who has a glow down? Hawk?
Tegan?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I forgot. I was only thinking about main characters, to be fair. Tegan appears like for 5 freaking seconds, so.
But they massacred your boy.
Nothing will ever be as bad as Zevran in Dragon Age 2. I'm so sorry. That is horrendous. I don't believe it. We can't tangent about this today. Okay. Anyway, so I have a few quotes before we get into our kind of discussions. So first, she says, sailing is like sex. Do it wrong and it'll make you sick. Do it right and there's no feeling in the world like it. Reminds me a lot of that old like saying that's basically like sex is like pizza. Really
it's got a sausage.
No, fuck you. Fuck you. No, it's something to the effect of sex is like pizza. Even when it's bad, it's still pretty good.
I don't know if I agree with that one as much as I agree with Isabela's quote.
All right. Well, the next one is also pretty funny, and it says, and she says this. And then Isabela went to the chantry and saw that it was boring. Canticle of Isabela, stanza 1, verse 1.
That is a whole mood of like, as someone who works in the church, that quote was a mood.
Yeah, fair. And then the next one, which we're going to go back to sex, is, I think she says this to Meryl. She says, you see, sweetness, men are only good for one thing. Women are good for 6.
You heard it here, folks.
All right, last one. And this one is an actual serious quote from her. When you get right down to it, we're not responsible for anyone but ourselves. You can choose to be free, or you can choose to be saddled with all the world's problems. What do you think about that quote?
I think it's really interesting because it's like, I am like putting it, I'm going to use a big word, juxtaposed to the Inquisition quote that's been living in my head rent free, which is, can't anything in this world stay fucking fixed?
Mm-hmm.
And I think Isabella's quote rings true for the Inquisitor. There's a lot, I mean, there are ways that your Inquisitor can end up being happy, especially for us Cullen Mancers. But
when have you ever been a Cullen Mancer?
that's my default Inquisition romance. Who'd you think my default Inquisition romance was?
Dorian.
No. It's Cullen.
Okay. Anyway,
That's
moving
I
right
like
along.
That. Learning new. Keeping the magic alive, people.
Shut the fuck up.
But yeah, I think that rings true for the Inquisitor. I think that rings true for Isabella's kind of whole thing, is that Isabella's going to help the person, I think at least, right in front of her, especially like a post DA2 Isabela, is going to help the person right in front of her, but she's not going to really concern herself with, oh, this random group or this random noble is, you know, off doing something. I actually think Isabela would be a great candidate for the Friends of Red Jenny.
Mm-hmm. See, I struggle with this quote because I don't think that everyone can choose to be free. I think that there are lots of people in our world and in Thetis too that do not have that luxury, who can't just assassinate their abusive husbands and leave. And assassinate their abusive rich husbands and leave with his money, with some of his wealth.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And like, there's a lot of people in like Tevinter, especially like, let's take Fenris for example. Like Fenris had to claw his way out to freedom. And yes, he did choose to leave and do all of that stuff, but he had to fight for it in a way that Isabela necessarily didn't have to do that. And I know that we talked about this in her like portrayal of like dumping slaves overboard, and I think that would cause a lot of conflict between Fenris and Isabela that we don't get to see because that conversation doesn't come up in game.
Right.
And I think also it comes from a point less of like people who are stuck in abusive situations, but like what Inquisitor, for example, would turn their back in that situation? If you have like any kind of moral whatever, what Inquisitor is going to turn their back and leave the world to rot when they have the power to close the rifts? Like, it's a sense of responsibility, and I'm reminded of one big story of the story of Esther, of, you know, for such a time of this, that kind of sense of like responsibility that you have there. Yeah. And I think that Isabela, in one of her flaws, doesn't understand what that kind of responsibility, probably because she's always had to look out for herself first. And I want to talk about that when we get to some of these characteristics that you put there.
Okay, well, let me just read my list and you can tell me whichever one you want to focus on. Totally cool. So I think the characteristics of Isabela that we see in game and in her portrayal are: she's fun-loving, she values freedom above all else, she is sarcastic, and she's funny, I think. She's okay with dishonesty and lying. She's not okay with feelings. She tells Hawk that their romance will just be a fling at the beginning of your romance. Even though her feelings may change, that's what she says. She's flirtatious and sexual, and I do also think she can be a little bit selfish.
So I've got two I want to focus on, and one is the first about not okay with feelings. To me, and you may disagree, I think Isabela is the only DA2 companion who is anywhere remotely close enough to emotionally stable for a relationship. Isabela knows who she is. She knows what she wants, and she knows how to communicate that to her partner of like, this is what I want. But is also open to live into the changes that are happening with her.
I do think that she is one of the only companions that is healthy enough to be in a relationship. I agree with that. But I don't think she's healthy enough to be in a relationship with Hawk.
That's probably fair. Zevran? Yeah, sure. If Zevran's not romancing the hero, which is not the case in your...
No, that isn't... Well, yeah, whatever.
But the selfish one, I mean, I do think she can be selfish or self-centered is what I would say. I think there's a difference between being self-centered and being outright selfish. I think there's a fine line, but I think there is a distinct difference in that. And I also think that I'm looking at the way she like takes Meryl under her wing. Like she has a care for Meryl that like a truly selfish person would not give two shits about. But she takes Meryl under her wing and like makes sure that she's okay, that she can understand the ways of the world, that she doesn't get taken advantage of. Meryl and Isabela is one of my favorite like friendship relationships of DA2.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I love their relationship. But I also think that to be a selfish person does not necessarily mean that you have to be selfish in every single one of your interactions with every single person you ever encounter. I think she is motivated by herself. I think that all of her goals in life, she's never looking outward. She's only looking inward of how can I escape my past decisions? How can I get around the effects and the consequences of my past decisions? And every decision she makes in the game stems from that. It just so happens that she also can be a kind person who cares about the people she's around, i.e. her relationship with Meryl. But that does not mean that she wouldn't sell Meryl under a ship if it meant that she could get out from under this debt. I think she absolutely would.
Even a Isabela who returns?
Maybe not an Isabela who returns, but definitely an Isabela at the beginning of the game. Definitely an Isabela who's not changed by the relationships that she has in the party, which is possible.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, at the end of the game, she doesn't even get mad at Hawk for picking mages over Templars or Templars over mages. She kind of gives you a little bit of a side eye if she picks the Templars, but she's not mad either way. She doesn't have an opinion. And I do think that that's one thing about Isabela that frustrates me, is that often she doesn't have an opinion on the events around her. She considers herself above all of these petty squabbles like politics and all this kind of stuff, when in reality, she just has the ability to have it not affect her life. Not everybody has that luxury.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And we've kind of like deviled into like what is our love and hate relationship with Isabela. I know you want to talk about her betrayal, so do you want to do that? And then we can kind of wrap up.
Yeah, so okay, my first discussion question is, in her different portrayals, she goes through a lot of character changes. So in Dragon Age 2, she hates slavery. But in the comics, we learn that she participated in the slave trade. What do you think about this narrative choice? Is it accurate to her character? And do you think this is a fair motivation and portrayal of a woman of color?
I think it is a little insensitive to give this to a woman of color, especially a woman of color who is so inspired by the Caribbean descent, where slavery was very, very bad. The sugar plantations of the Caribbean were brutal and terrible and just horrendous. And so, because you either went to work in the cotton and tobacco plantations of the South, or you went to the sugar plantations of the Caribbean.
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, a lot of slaves later, after, the colonies had really been established, a lot of slaves were taken from the Caribbean and came to the United States to work. So it's kind of like, why would you choose this person to have this backstory?
Right. And I think like her own hating of slavery, she doesn't want to be a slave. She hates the idea of being bound to anything. To any kind. It's why she wants a fling. She doesn't want to be bound to a relationship. She doesn't want to be bound to a path. She doesn't want to be bound to standing up to a political idea that would cause her to have to do something. She wants to absolve herself of all responsibility. And I think I agree. It is a very privileged stance to take in Theta, just because the suffering and political ideology is across the board all over there. But like even in Origins, like she doesn't offer an opinion on the Blight. She doesn't offer anything like that, and that is an existential threat.
Yeah. I think my take on it is I really do feel like her character in Dragon Age 2, while she does have a couple comments that are off-putting about Fenris specifically, I don't think that it makes sense for her character as it is portrayed in 2 to have the backstory she has in the comics. I think the backstory of her mother and all of that makes total sense, but this whole backstory of her dealing in the slave trade is kind of a slap in the face, in my opinion, because like, why would a person who narrowly escaped slavery of her own twice over with an abusive husband who threatened to lend her out to be assaulted by his associates, number one, and number two, from the Qun, why would she even deal in the slave trade? Why would she not just walk off completely or refuse? She could have been a pirate without being part of whatever organization it is that's forcing her to deal in the slave trade.
Yeah, and I will say this isn't a like super known, like it wasn't a lot, but there were pirates in the Caribbean who vehemently opposed the slave trade. Like they would liberate plantations and they would do that, and a lot of escaped slaves went on to serve on pirate vessels.
Right.
And it just comes down to, and I'm reminded of a point, this debate comes up in Assassin's Creed Black Flag between Edward Kenway and his first mate Adewale, who is an escaped slave. And it's a point where Edward has to use a slave ship to try to get to his goal, and Edward is doing it, and his crew is super uncomfortable with it. And I would believe that in a similar kind of situation, especially in that area, would be similar to that. And it just, especially like dealing with, oh, you could be captured by a Qunari dreadnought that's just, patrolling forever, and oops. It just does seem unlikely, and I think it is that Cheryl Chee and David Gator had different visions of this character. And David Gator, as the more lead writer of BioWare, basically said, I'm going to write what I want.
But don't you think that's kind of shitty, though, to retcon basically someone's concept of the character that got put into the game via your comic?
I agree.
But at the end of the day, I mean, to be fair, I think that's speculation, because we know, and they have said multiple times, that one writer doesn't just work on the character. Like, it is a team, even if one writer works on one character primarily. Like, this is a team thing. It's not just one person's character.
Right. And they have also said many times that the comics are secondary to the game.
Thank God. Okay, so I think we can move on to our last question before we wrap it up, which is, why do you love or hate this character?
I like Isabela, and she's my preferred romance for a female Hawk. The reason I like her romance is for the fact that Isabela, unlike Meryl, unlike Anders, and Fenris to some respect, doesn't expect her romance with Hawk to fix all her problems. And I think that it's such a refreshing take of, no, like, oh, I'm the hypersexualized character. You're not going to own me, and I'm not going to immediately fall in love with you. Instead, I'm going to tell you I want nothing to do with you. Like, you're my one night stand, not I'm your one night stand. And I think that is a little refreshing, especially for women in video games, to take that approach. Especially in BioWare, who with Mass Effect has a history of, okay, we banged and now I love you for eternity.
That's fair. I think that's a very fair point. I do appreciate your distinction between expecting, you know, this romance to solve all your problems, whereas Fenris is very much like, no romance, no person, no nothing can ever solve any of my problems, which is not true. Mm-hmm. But that's where Fenris is at, and I do think that kind of comparison is funny. For me, I like Isabela. I think that she's funny. I think that she's attractive. I think that she brings a much, much, much needed lightheartedness to the party makeup. That party is so down in the dumps all the time. And the only two people who ever liven it up are Varric and Isabela, and sometimes Purple Hawk, if you decide to be Purple Hawk. Everybody else is so sad and like down and angry all the time. Mm-hmm. And so I do very much appreciate that about her. She's got great one-liners, but I have to be honest, it's so hard for me to say that I love her because of the way she's written in the comics. It's just hard for me to get over. I can't get over it. And I think that is kind of important for anybody who's out there who is a writer, not even necessarily anybody at BioWare who's listening. Like, one thing might turn somebody off from your character. And for me, Isabela's portrayal in the comics, that's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I get that. And like, it's sometimes like when something happens to a character, especially when like an original author is not the one who's primarily writing this. And I think a lot about, I know you don't like it when I talk about Harry Potter, but in The Cursed Child, and spoilers if you haven't read this for this play or whatever, they have Hermione as Minister of Magic. And I don't think that that's the correct career path for. I actually don't think any of them have the correct career paths.
Harry being a wizard cop is bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Like,
anyway,
all three of them are so done with the system in that, and I think that that's kind of where it comes to. Of sometimes it's hard to get over those things and what they do to characters and the choices that they make. To kind of be beyond there. Even like when you take something like Korra and Toph Beifong, the most anti-establishment, you know, screw everyone authority in Avatar, founds a department of police, becomes chief of police. Like, that is not accurate. And it's like this idea that, oh, when you grow up, you learn the value of systems and authority. Mm-hmm.
Which is very like neoliberal thing to think. But I think if that's all we have to say about Isabela, we can kind of wrap it up for the day.
Yeah. So thanks for bringing all this research. It was fun as always. And thank you all for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. You can find us on Twitter at DALorecast.
If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, join our Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's easily the best place on the internet. You can also support us financially through our Patreon. You can find us there on patreon.com/DragonAgeLorecast.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Network. For more information about the Robots Radio Network, join the Discord server via the link in our episode description.
If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, and join the Patreon. And if you enjoyed our intro and outro music, give a big thank you to Pipeman Studios. Thank you, Pipeman. Thanks again for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
Have you ever wanted to deep dive into the lore and stories behind all your favorite Marvel movies? Then do we have the show for you? I'm Captain Shenko.
And I'm Psych88. Join us as we dissect the media megalith that is the MCU. We'll talk about the origin stories, the fights, and everything in between.
The MCU Lorecast releases on all major podcasting platforms on Mondays as part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club and can be found on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.